Hey guys, what's going on? It's EJ. Yeah, we're here to talk about the 2025 mayoral debate. It was a three-way debate, a three-way dance, if you will. New York City mayoral debate between Zoran Mamdani, Zoran Mamdani, Curtis Sweela, and Andrew Cuomo, former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Let me just say, like all, at least what's going on, like all three ways, whether they be sexual, whether they be mayoral, whatever, it ends up being an affair between two people where the third person gets left out. And that's exactly what happened in this mayoral debate. Most of it was focused on Andrew Cuomo and Zoran Mamdani. Curtis Sweela, he kind of felt like a third wheel. And if you've ever been out on a date with a couple, you know this feeling. And this is exactly how Curtis Sweela felt. And he even got frustrated at one point in the debate and said, listen, this is a three-way debate. Stop leaving me out. Stop cutting me off. Like the moderators, it was broadcast on NBC. So the moderators were from NBC, Telemundo, and Politico, three publications. And he's like, stop leaving me out. At one point, he said, they asked all the three candidates, what are the plans for the city? And he goes, my plan for the city. And then she goes, oh, well, next question, move on. And it's like the guy was treated so unfairly. And I felt really bad for him, you know, being up there, trying to get his point across. And he just, they just kept, giving him the cold shoulder as if he didn't even matter. But in the interaction between Andrew Cuomo and Zoran Mamdani, it got really heated because obviously a mud was swung at each guy by the other. One of the things that Andrew Cuomo pointed out about Mamdani was, of course, his lack of experience. They brought up his lack of experience. He's a state assemblyman. He hasn't served in any executive capacity at all, only a congressional capacity, being an assemblyman. And Andrew Cuomo, of course, has a dearth of political experience. He was Bill Clinton's HUD secretary, during his tenure in the 90s. He was, of course, former governor of New York for 2 terms, well, almost 2 terms, and of course, he's the son of a a um a former governor, Mario Cuomo, and the brother of a one of the biggest faces in media of all time. So he has the clear advantage, and Mondami clearly does not. So another key takeaway: they get into talking about foreign affairs. Now, Lisa, we're watching this together, not together, but Lisa was watching it and I was watching it too. And she said to me, she said, well, why are they bringing up the Middle East and Trump negotiating the treaty between Israel and Hamas in a mayoral debate, something that has nothing to do with the politics of New York City? And I brought up, simply put, the reason why. And the reason is because Zoran Mamdani is a Muslim. And Zoran Mamdani himself brings this up. He feels like this was an Islamophobic attack on his character, continuously bringing this up, asking him specifically how he feels about Hamas, asking him to constantly condemn Hamas. This is stupid. They do this to every single Muslim personality that they get on their platforms, whether it's NBC, even Piers Morgan does it. It became a joke when Piers Morgan now, because it's like, condemn Hamas, condemn Hamas. Do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? Like, of course, everybody condemns Hamas. Everybody condemns what happened on October the 7th, 2023. Now, they try to paint Mandani like he is anti Semitic, like he's against Jewish people, that he hates Jewish people, because when he was younger in college, and this is brought up in the debate, he made the comment, globalize the intifada. And during Barack Obama's presidency, he called Barack Obama evil because of the things that Barack Obama was allegedly doing to the Muslim world at the time, the drone strikes and everything. And he, in a rap song, he defended five Palestinian terrorists, which they brought up as well. But Mandami's whole thing is, yeah, I did some crazy shit in college, and I've grown up and I've changed my views. This past Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish high holy days, Mandami, all he did was, go to visit various synagogues and try to make amends with the Jewish community, because New York City is 25% or 20 to 35% Jewish, so it's a high constituency in his party. But Andrew Cuomo was having none of it. Andrew Cuomo was continuously saying to denounce Hamas, denounce the phrase globalize the intifada. And then Curtis Sweela brought up, when they finally let him speak and let him have his day in court, he brought up how in 1991, he and the Guardian Angels defended the Jewish community in Crown Heights Borough Park in Williamsburg from attacks. This was the 1991 Crown Heights riots. We spoke about this in my retrospective of the 90s video. It was an incident that was sparked. A Jewish van in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, ran over a child, Gavin Cato, an Afro-Guyanese kid, and let him die in the streets, and that resulted in riots and clashes between the predominantly West Indian / Black community in Crown Heights and the Hasidic Jewish community of Chabad Lubavitch, also in Crown Heights. And it went on for days and days. At that time, Mayor David Dinkins, was the mayor. And Curtis Sweela throws former Mayor Dinkins, the late Mayor Dinkins, under the bus when he makes this comment, when he says that they did this to protect the Jewish community, and that Mayor Dinkins was the first socialist mayor of New York City, being a member of the Democratic Socialist Party when he was elected mayor in 1989. You know what I mean? So Sweela, took his swipe at Mandami there, suggesting that Mandami would be as bad as allegedly, as he says, Mayor Dinkins was. So, so basically suggesting that Mandami is bad for the Jewish community. But Sweela didn't stop there. They went on to, because one of the things that Cuomo was harping on was that Mandami's inexperience. He basically said that Mandami would, if it came down to a natural disaster, if it came down to a natural disaster or something, or a pandemic, Mandami wouldn't know how to handle it, right? Because of his inexperience. And then Sweela strikes back with, well, Andrew Cuomo, was responsible for attacks. Andrew Cuomo, and the way that he handled COVID, was responsible for attacks on the Asian community, which Sweela and the Guardian Angels protected in 2020 from attacks during COVID. So, and basically both Mandami and Sweela criticized Andrew Cuomo for his actions as governor during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's true, we talked about it before, Andrew Cuomo basically stuffed people into these facilities and put a lot of older people at risk during COVID, right? Because Andrew Cuomo, one of the things that, if you guys remember back from to 2020, Andrew Cuomo was positioning himself as a possible candidate for the Democratic Party in 2020 for president. So he was positioning himself as the spokesperson for the Democratic position during COVID, right? And a lot of the Democrats were on board with him at one point before the scandal, right? So, but then after the scandal, we found out that this happened, and basically he was persona non grata because of this. You know what I mean? So both Suila and Mondami were pointing this out. Then they get into the issue with the police, how Zohar Mandani basically advocated for the defund the police position after George Floyd, right? And how Andrew Cuomo is like this defender of the police all of a sudden, and so is Curtis Suila. And so on the one hand, well, on this police position, on this police issue, it was like Suila and Cuomo against Mondami, and then on the issue of COVID, it was Mondami and Suila against Cuomo. So, and then they talk about what's the main issue facing New Yorkers, and if all three of them, the only thing all three of them really agreed on was that rats and rodents are one of the main issues facing New Yorkers, especially Suila and Cuomo. Mondami talked about some of his controversial positions. They attack the rent freeze thing is one of the things they attack. The free bus rides and free childcare stuff is one of the things that both Suila and Cuomo went after. Suila calling it a fantasy, basically saying that Mondami's living in a fantasy world, and also accusing later on in the debate Cuomo of living in a fantasy world, because it came down to a discussion of with regards to police about how to handle people that are mentally ill people, mentally ill patients, and how to handle confrontations with them. And Suila said that cops should be consulted first, primarily. He's on the side of law enforcement, seeing as he would be, because he the Guardian Angels, for those that don't know, the Guardian Angels was founded on February 14th, 1979, as basically a civilian protection agency to protect civilians. During a time in New York City in the late 1970s, when New York City was really bad. What people on the news say that Chicago is now, where Chicago is this buzzword for the worst place in America. In the 1970s, that's what New York was. You know what I mean? New York had a series of bad mayoral administrations, including that of John Lindsay and that of Mayor Herb Bean, that it really destroyed the city and really made it kind of a horrible place to live. And the trains in particular, the subway system, were hit. There were tons of gangs in New York. If you listen to the lyrics of the 1977 hit by the Bee Gees on the soundtrack to Saturday Night Fever, "Staying Alive," many people approach that song as a party song, as a disco song, and it is. But if you listen to the lyrics, he says, staying alive, struggling to keep my head above water and shit like that. You know what I mean? And it's called Staying Alive because that's what New York was at the time, a war zone. It was the worst city in the world. As a matter of fact, the local politicians in New York at the time, applied for federal funding from the president of the United States, Gerald Ford, and Gerald Ford famously told New York City to drop, New York City officials to drop dead. You know what I mean? Go to hell. Like the city was terrible at that time. So uh, he stepped in. He was a manager at a McDonald's, and he felt like he had to do something, and he formed the Guardian Angels. They were trained in martial arts. They were trained in this sort of stuff. Eventually, he even got shot himself. Curtis Sweela even got shot because of his take on crime, especially the gangs in the city and the stranglehold that the mafia had on New York at the time. So he has really served this city pretty well. Now the Guardian Angels, over time, during the 80s, for example, they developed a reputation as being a sort of group, sometimes taking the law into their own hands. But overall, they were pretty good in terms of the work they did, around New York City, and they eventually branched out into other parts of the country and other parts of the world. Guardian Angels exist everywhere. So during the 1990s, as the city became better, under the administration of Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, they were seen less on New York City subways, but they were still, pretty active. But over time, they've during the administrations of Mayor Bill de Blasio and the Mayor Eric Adams, they've been brought back because things have gone back to kind of the way they were in the 70s. Gangs are back. They came back in the 90s, and inflation is back, and stagflation and joblessness is back. All this stuff that was they didn't have the election yet, David. All this stuff that what we thought was gone in the 70s and 80s, and early 90s, is back now in New York. You know what I mean? That reputation that New York had as Gotham City, the real life Gotham City, is back. So, he brought the organization back. We resurrected the organization because he felt there was a need for it, once again. So I give him credit for that, but an interesting point of the debate came when they asked the three candidates who they considered the best politician. Lisa says Adams brought it back along with Bill de Blasio. Yeah, an interesting the crime. Yeah, an interesting debate. Interesting point of it came when they discussed politicians that they admired. First, they mentioned the president because we mentioned in the 70s, Ford telling New York officials to drop dead. Basically, well, that is an interesting intersection with today's politicians because if Zoran Mamdani wins the election, Donald Trump has pledged to cut funding to New York City and to basically do another Gerald Ford in telling New York City to drop dead with regards to federal funding. So Donald Trump has become, in the presidential politics, has become forefront of this debate because of how Trump feels about Mamdani and the prospect of Mamdani winning the election. Now, so a discussion among the three became who's their favorite politician presidentially. And Cuomo said that Bill Clinton was his favorite. And because he worked under the administration of Bill Clinton. At one time, it's funny though, because at one time in 1992, they were positioning his father, Mario Cuomo, as the darling of the Democratic Party and to run against Bill Clinton in the primary. So ultimately, that didn't happen. Mario Cuomo declined to run, but and Bill Clinton eventually hired his son Andrew Cuomo as the HUD secretary. During the '90s. So he put Bill Clinton as the top modern president. Uh, um, Curtis Sweela said Ronald Reagan, uh, and Mandami took it all the way back, super throwback to FDR. And that's interesting that he mentioned FDR because, well, FDR is the architect of the modern day Democratic Party. He's the guy who instituted the New Deal. He was also governor of New York at one time. Uh, so, and also a native New Yorker. But and then they mentioned who is their favorite politician overall, right? And um, uh, Cuomo said to Mandami, wait a minute. He said modern. Is FDR modern? Well, it depends on what you mean by modern. The last 20 years, the last 30 years, I would say that FDR is pretty modern. I mean, I would date modern to after the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So yeah, I would say. I thought Mandami was going to say Barack Obama, but the thing is, he should have said Barack Obama because he's closer. His politics are a lot closer to Barack Obama's than they are to FDR's. Saying FDR doesn't lend him any credence or any points with the Jewish community. And he did it with a smirk, knowing that that's the case. Because let's face facts. FDR at his time was probably well liked by the Jewish community, but nowadays is clearly not liked in retrospect by a lot of Jewish people in general because it was FDR who refused to allow Jewish refugees during the Holocaust into the United States. Like he actually put a ban on Jewish refugees arriving from Germany and Eastern Europe into the United States while he was president. So, I mean, that doesn't lend him any credence with the Jewish community by saying that. He also, as his favorite mayor, he named Frullo LaGuardia. So he should have said Obama. You know what I mean? That would have helped him a lot because Obama had a lot of Jewish followers. Like most Jewish people voted for Obama. He had a huge support in the Jewish community, on the Democratic side. So he should have said Barack Obama. Nobody mentioned Obama, like Lisa said. And I think that was a disservice because if you look at this debate, and then when they mentioned mayor, he said LaGuardia. And I guess LaGuardia counts as points for the Jewish community because he was half Jewish himself. He had a Jewish mom, he spoke Yiddish and stuff. But again, the modern day audience has no familiarity really with Florio LaGuardia or anything that to me, even I have not that much familiarity with LaGuardia and his policies. Right, exactly. He was just saying it to sound smart. To me, LaGuardia is an airport, and to people of my generation and to people, anybody living today, LaGuardia is an airport. LaGuardia is not a person. He was a person, but today he's an airport. you, you, you know, you, you know, he's an airport in Queens and a school. So him saying that is just a wink and a nod to the fact that he is a socialist. He does believe in socialism because FDR was a socialist. FDR at the time was accused of being a socialist by the people that he, his political enemies, particularly William Howard Taft's son, Robert Taft, and Wendell Willkie and Alf Landon, the people that he, ran against in the 1938 election and the 1940 election, for example. Uh, he was accused of being a socialist. And if you look at the New Deal, it was kind of socialism. It was the most robust infrastructure project that the United States had ever done at the time when he did the New Deal. And many historians would argue that his policies of Keynesian economics and government spending did not help the Great Depression. It only made it worse. What really helped us get out of the Great Depression was our entry into World War II. So there's criticism there. So that didn't lend him any points. Like Lisa's saying, he wasn't even born yet. He was hesitant to say Obama because many on the far left don't like Obama. Obama was a center leftist. But this, center left, moderate Democrat. But this debate, this race, not the debate, but the race, is so much reminiscent of 2008. Like, it's completely reminiscent of 2008. And let me explain why. What we have here is a Clinton-era Democrat in Andrew Cuomo, a Reagan-era Republican who has been in the public scene forever in Curtis Sweela, who doesn't even really matter, who's a non-factor in the way that John McCain was a non-factor in the 2008 presidential election, and a young assemblyman. And the assembly and the state level is the same as the Senate on the federal level, somebody who's been in the legislative branch of the government but has never been an executive. And you have a Clinton-era Democrat who's part of a political oligarchy, a political family in Andrew Cuomo. And you have somebody who is the city version of a war veteran in Curtis Sweela. He's never been in a war, but he's been in wars with gangs and shit like that, in the same way that John McCain was, in Vietnam. You know what I mean? So this is a local mini version of the 2008 election. The same things that were leveled at Barack Obama are being leveled at Zohran Mamdani. That he's a Muslim, that he's against Jewish people, that he's a socialist, that he's the new FDR, that he has no experience, he's never served in an executive position. Those were the same allegations leveled at him that were leveled at Barack Obama by both Hillary Clinton and John McCain. And John McCain was a weak Republican. No, but he wasn't. He was barely a Republican, right? You know what I mean? And he was just put in there as a Republican representative. When the debate, when the race in the presidential race in 2008 was more about Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and where the left wing of the political spectrum was going. John McCain was a non-factor in the same way that Curtis Sweela is a non-factor here. And to add to that, here's another thing, Lisa, that makes the parallels even stronger, is that nobody, any of the three candidates, during the 2008 presidential election, none of the three main candidates wanted to associate with the person in power because George Bush was such a horrible president in people's minds. And the same thing here. Nobody wants to associate at all with Mayor Adams. Mayor Adams is a disgraced mayor. Nobody is looking for Mayor Adams's endorsement, just like nobody was looking for President Bush's endorsement in 2008. People are running away from it. Zohran Mamdani, who was a Democrat, is running away from the endorsement of Mayor Eric Adams. Nobody wants Mayor Eric Adams' endorsement is like the plague. Do not endorse me. Do not endorse me. I don't want your endorsement. No. Me too. I thought this was the first one too. But they're saying, no, I don't want Mayor Adams' endorsement. Nobody wants Mayor Adams' endorsement. He's a disgraced mayor. He's a terrible mayor, a horrible mayor, and nobody wants his endorsement. You know, and also another parallel is that there's a sex scandal involved. Just as there was a sex scandal attached to Hillary Clinton in the 2008 election. She herself wasn't involved with the sex scandal like Cuomo is, but her husband, Bill Clinton, was involved with it, and she was complicit, many people say. You know what I mean? So here you have a person who's only been in the legislative branch of the government, who's inexperienced, who has a Muslim name and is accused of being anti-Semitic because of his alleged Muslim connections, right? The difference is that Barack Obama actually was not a Muslim, and Zohar Mamdani is a Muslim. That's the only difference. And then you have, an establishment Republican who nobody really cares about, and then you have an establishment Democrat with a sex scandal linked to them, and you also have involved in it a disgraced current executive. So it's like a New York City version of the 2008 election. So it's a lot of the same things, but Mandami didn't embrace Barack Obama. He got Barack Obama's endorsement, but he didn't say that Obama was his favorite president or politician or mention Barack Obama, which, like Lisa, I thought that was a shame. George Pataki also came up because Curtis Wheeler said he was his favorite politician overall. And I was disappointed with this because during the 1990s, while a lot of people say that George Pataki was a terrific governor, I think Curtis Wheeler only mentioned Pataki because Pataki was the one who defeated Cuomo's father. So it was a stab at Andrew Cuomo. But I didn't like Governor Pataki at the time, former Governor George Pataki, because I was going to a school for students with disabilities at the time, and he was trying to take away money, trying to withdraw funding from my school and other schools that specialize in stuff for students with disabilities. So I've never forgiven George Pataki for that in my life, and I consider him a horrible mayor just for that. So yeah, fuck George Pataki. He did have 3 terms as mayor. The guy's governor. So I guess some people liked him, but I didn't. You know what I mean? And at that time, this was '97, and at that time I didn't really know a lot about politics, but I was learning. As a kid growing up, learning. Watching the news. I was always a news fanatic. So I was watching the news and learning, basically that's really par for the course for Republicans, but I didn't understand it at the time. So I'm like, why is this guy, taking money away from my school? We're desperately in need of it. So that caused me to have a lot of animosity towards him. So it's just something I remember. So I don't consider him a great governor at all. But I understand why Sweela mentioned him. And one of the stupid parts of the debate was them mentioning their bodega order. Like, I can't stand this stupid shit when they bring this unserious stuff into a debate. You know what I mean? And like, who cares what they order at a bodega? You know what I mean? I I guess this kind of thing, this could be just me speculating, but I guess they mention this because they want to show they're kind of connected to New York. You know what I mean? So Sweela said bacon, egg, and cheese with no salt. Cuomo said bacon, egg, and cheese, said the same thing, which leads me to believe that Cuomo never even stepped foot in a bodega, right? You know what I mean? Right? Like he never even stepped foot in a bodega, right? Just like he never even stepped foot in a mosque, right? You know what I mean? He doesn't. He no idea what like a bodega. Please, I don't you know, like and understand the meaning behind this kind of thing because this is the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that this is what lost George H.W. Bush. One of the things that lost George H.W. Bush the election in 1992 was he went shopping right at a grocery store and he didn't even know how to use the checkout line. And so what it signaled to the audience, to the people watching, to the prospective voters, was that he's out of touch with the common people. And this kind of signaled that with me with Andrew Cuomo, because he didn't give a different answer than Curtis Sweela. He just said with no salt also, which means like you don't know anything about bodegas or what normal people eat, right? I thought that Mandami was going to come with his order was chopped cheese. You know what I mean? The Aki way. You know what I mean? But maybe that would have said from that they would have been like, oh, well, he's a radical Muslim, right? Of course he's getting it the Aki way, right? You know, you know. Lisa says to break the tension. Maybe so. But and Public Enemy got a mention. Public Enemy got a mention by Curtis Sweela in the debate because they brought up 311 and the fact that 311. And again, Andrew Cuomo lost points on this one because he said that he never called 311 ever, right? So, and then he said somebody told him about how bad 311 was, and then he called it, and then he was like, okay, yeah, it is bad. But bro, you're such an elitist that nobody ever believed that you needed 311 anyway, right? You're a politician's son. You're a complete nepo baby. Like you know nothing. You're a political animal. You know nothing about the common people of New York City. One thing I will give Curtis Sweela credit on is that he is New York City. Like he knows more than even Mondami. He knows the common people of New York City. Like this guy has been on the ground level fighting crime and doing things with normal people, going to every single neighborhood and connecting with people in the neighborhoods in his campaign. He's done that. You know what I mean? I will give him credit on that. I may not like his politics or the fact that I feel like he'll be a mini Trump because Trump, again, comes up in the debate as well. They said, did anybody ever speak to the president? And Cuomo says that he's had, talks with the president right after his assassination attempt last year. And then Mondami said he never spoke to Donald Trump, right? And then Curtis Sweela says that he's had a relationship with Trump before, and he's even been in battles with Trump because Trump is from New York. So of course he will factor in more so than any other president before him, right? Because he's from New York, and this is a debate about New York. So Sweela is a part of New York. His organization is a fixture in New York City. He's a native New Yorker. He grew up in New York. He knows the city in and out more than these other two guys. I mean, Mondami knows it pretty well as well, but like Sweela, this is his city. You know what I mean? This is his. Like he wears there's very few people in the world that are more New York than him. Like Jay-Z would have to run for mayor to be more New York than this guy. You know what I mean? But I don't like a lot of his politics, but I'm just saying, as far as New York, as far as representing, New York and stuff, the common people and knowing the culture of New York, there's nobody better than him, in terms of that. But he won't win. He won't. Uh, this debate pretty much solidified to most people that Zohar Mamdani is the winner of the race because Cuomo won't win because he's out of touch with the common people. He's an elitist. Like another answer I like from Sweela to give him points, and this is to be fair. I like this from him. They mentioned, do the people pay their credit card bills on time? Right? And Mandami says he pays his every month. Cuomo says he pays his every month. And Sweela said, I don't have a credit card. I only have a debit card. you know? And I'm like, man, this guy is shrewd. If they let him speak, he would have done much better. But again, they cut him off at every turn. And like Lisa said, why is he even here? You know what I mean? Like, and it's true. And another thing I liked Mandami's answer on this one is about rent, because they tried. The thing is that these two other candidates tried to attack Mandami, the fact he lives in a rent stabilized apartment, but he basically said, "Look, I have to live in this rent stabilized apartment because fuck, New York is too expensive. This is the common everyday existence of a New Yorker living in a rent stabilized apartment because everything is fucking expensive." Andrew Cuomo, I mean, again, doesn't know shit about the average everyday problems that the average everyday New Yorker faces. you, you, and simply only wants to be mayor because he can no longer be governor. And speaking of other politicians that are currently serving that were thrown under the bus, one of the people that was thrown under the bus, even by Andrew Cuomo, and she was his lieutenant governor, which is why she's current governor today, is Kathy Hochul. Kathy Hochul, all three men were asked how they feel about her, and Andrew Cuomo did not come to her defense. And this was your lieutenant governor. This was the woman that was on your side, right? You know what I mean? And you didn't even endorse it. And then he blames Mondami for not endorsing her, right? He blames Mondami. He says, oh, Mondami didn't endorse her. But you didn't endorse her either. And like, why should we hate Mondami for not endorsing her? And you didn't endorse her, and she was your lieutenant governor. I mean, that's like Barack Obama not endorsing Joe Biden for president in the 2020 election. Like, that was his vice president, and he didn't. That was his partner. Why would a lieutenant governor is on the state level the same equivalent to a vice president on the national level? Like, she ran with you, and now you freaking don't support her. That's some bullshit, and that shows to me that a lot of this is character as well, right? That shows you're disloyal, and you're completely disloyal to not. You say that he said that, and Zohar Mamdani was not the true Democrat because Zohar Mamdani went against Obama and went against when he was a kid, and went against Mayor Adams and went against all these other Democrats, and initially ran in a different party, like as a socialist or whatever. But you, Andrew Cuomo, after you lost the primaries to Mondami, you switched parties. And the reason why you're still running is because you decided to drop out of the Democratic Party and run as an independent. So who's the disloyal one? You know what I mean? You wouldn't even be here if you decided, you know what, I'm going to be the bigger person. Again, going back to the 2008 debate when Hillary Clinton refused to drop out. You know, She eventually did, but she took forever in endorsing Barack Obama and refused to do the right thing and basically create uniformity among the party. Andrew Cuomo, right? Lisa's right. He can't. He didn't do that. He decided to switch parties and freaking run as an independent. He can't take no for an answer because he's a spoiled brat, a nepo baby. This guy believes that he's entitled to run New York state or city or maybe even the country because his father was Mario Cuomo. Come on, you know, like, and this is how he's such a bullshit artist too, because when they said your favorite politician, he hesitated to say his own. Like he should have said his own father. He eventually did say that, but at first he hesitated. Why is Bill Clinton more important to you than your own father? You know what I mean? Because he's trying to get those Clinton voters, those Clinton Democrats. Clinton Democrats are a different type of Democrat. We spoke about this before. Bill Clinton type of Democrat is the neoliberal Democrats, the Democrats, the new Democrats, the Democrats that they're Democrats in name only. Really, they act like Republicans. It was Bill Clinton who passed the crime bill in 1994. It was Bill Clinton who passed welfare reform, cutting millions of families off of welfare. It was Bill Clinton that did all this stuff, and Andrew Cuomo was part of his administration as the HUD secretary. So, and there are still some of those kind of Democrats still left in the party. See, Andrew Cuomo wants to get those kind of those Democrats, those Clintonites, the neoliberal types on his side. So he's trying to position himself. He's trying to say, well, I'll take you back to the glory days of the 1990s when those type of Democrats were in power. But dynamics are totally different now, Andrew Cuomo. You know what I mean? Like, as good as the Clinton years were, Clinton didn't, and you didn't, and that administration didn't initiate the economic boom of the 90s. The internet did. When the internet came about, that's when the economy picked up from 1995 onward. You know what I mean? So just like FDR's New Deal policies didn't take us out of the Great Depression, Bill Clinton's policies didn't bring us out of the economic recession of the early 90s. The internet did. It just so happened that was what happened. You know what I mean? He got lucky. You know what I mean? He got lucky. And your policies, your Clinton-esque policies are not fit for the 21st century. They'll just tank the city. So it's like they tanked the state when you were governor. So because during his tenure as governor, many cities, many businesses, and they brought this up in the debate too, many businesses went down south. Amazon was supposed to be here in New York, but Andrew Cuomo and other Democrats at that time that were in power, they blocked that from happening. And what did Amazon do? They took their business elsewhere. Walmart is another example. Walmart, there is no Walmart. There's a Walmart in every state, in every part of the country. But guess what? And Lisa knows this too. Anybody that lives in New York City, there is no Walmart in New York City. There is in Green Acres Mall, right? But technically, Green Acres Mall is the cutoff point of New York City. That's basically Nassau County. Might as well be. But in the 5 boroughs proper, there is no Walmart. Walmart doesn't exist here because politicians like Andrew Cuomo blocked that from happening because for various political reasons. Why? Because Hillary Clinton was initially on the board of Walmart and they kicked her off. That was one of the reasons. The other reason has to do with unionization. Walmart is not union, doesn't demand their workers to be union, so a lot of New Yorkers felt like that wouldn't be beneficial. But it would be beneficial to the consumer, so Andrew Cuomo's policies will just benefit, you know, lining the lining the pocket of politicians, as these neoliberal Democrats often do. Now, and that was brought up in the debate, the blocking of various big businesses and corporations. Now, I like Zoran Mandami, but I don't know, and this is a fair criticism, I don't know how this whole thing of the I agree with Curtis Wheeler in a sense. The whole thing of the mental health expert and cop, like this is putting the mental health expert at risk here. Now, one of the things that was brought up with regards to Andrew Cuomo's tenure as governor is that while he was governor, many mental institutions were closed. And that because that happened, many people that are mentally ill were left out in the city, and that increased the homelessness in New York City and state because of the things he did. You know what I mean? And this has been something that has been a huge problem since the 1980s with both Democrats and Republican administrations in the city, state, and federal level is the lack of funding for mental institutions. Taking the funding away and defunding them has resulted in people that are mentally unstable being left out in the street and out in the cold, quite literally. And I don't know if employing mental health experts really works in a, you know, without cops. You know what I mean? In tandem, maybe, but the cops have to be paramount. The cops have to be front facial. I think that that's something that if Zoran Mamdani is elected, he will have to rethink because that to me is not smart. That puts the mental health expert at risk as well as the person that they're trying to assault, especially when it comes to domestic disputes. Um, so Lisa's bringing up something too that I also was going to that I completely forgot about, but I put it in my notes. The moderator should have asked Kuma about him signing the cashless bail law in 2019 when he was governor. Yes, and that's one of the reasons crime is up. Yes, what I think that was though, Lisa, was his attempt to try to do justice reform, and it was a failed attempt. What it basically was saying that um, criminals come out on bail without significant payment, and that of course increased crime. Like Lisa's saying, I think that a lot of these these politicians they don't think things through. That's one of the things I do like about Curtis Sweela is his common sense approach to things. You know what I mean? Because he's been on the ground on it and he's experienced, you know, what it's like in the crime world. He has an understanding of these things that Landami and Cuomo simply do not have. They have an ideological understanding of it. But the thing is, sometimes you can be so smart that you can be dumb. You know what I mean? You can be overly educated that you can actually be dumb in common sense things. And a lot of this stuff, like the cashless bail bill that Lisa's talking about, are actual. They don't make any sense from a practical standpoint. And Cuomo passed that. So, like, no, I'm not. But that's totally irrelevant, David. I mean, but I'm not a Knicks fan. No, I'm not. uh, they disappoint constantly. They never win. They haven't won since like 1973, and I wasn't even alive back then. So I'm not going to be like Zoran Mandami and reference something just to sound smart, just to sound like I have a grasp on history. I clearly don't. I wasn't alive during the Willis Reed era and Earl Monroe era, even though I met Willis Reed and Earl Monroe. In high school. They came to my school. But yeah, so the Lakers, the Lakers. I've always been a Lakers fan since the Magic Johnson days, and then the Shaq and Kobe days, and now the LeBron days. Okay, cool. But steering it back to the mayoral debate over. Yeah, they should, Lisa. Overall, I think um, the Curtis Sweela might get an uptick. I don't know if he'll win, but he might get an uptick because he tried to hold his own with a common sense approach against these two guys that are basically two. This was a civil war between Democrats, between two visions of the Democratic Party: the vision of Zohar Mandami and the vision of um, Andrew Cuomo. This really had nothing to do with Republicans. Republicans are completely irrelevant because nobody tries when they're a Republican in New York City because they think New York City is too blue. As Curtis Sweela has said on the campaign trail, the only Republican that New Yorkers have seen is Abraham Lincoln on a $5 bill. You know what I mean? Because it's been years since we've had a Republican in office. And, he doesn't really stand a chance. Okay. Lisa's asking a question. Good point, Lisa. A socialist Democrat and a Democrat. A democratic socialist, or a what Zohar Mandani is somebody like on the political spectrum. There is there you often hear these words used, right and left. What does this mean? Um, well, it goes origins go back to the French Revolution. During the French Revolution of 1789, the first French Revolution, the people who believed in the king and believed that the monarchy should be restored, they sat on the left side of the political of the aisle, and the ones who supported the monarchy, they sat on the right side of the political aisle. So when somebody says a right winger, they're talking about, and there's a spectrum. Far right is a fascist like Adolf Hitler, and the far left is a communist like Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, and Fidel Castro. And in the middle are liberals, conservatives, and revolutionaries and reactionaries on the left side. I mean, liberals, revolutionaries, and anarchists and communists on the left side. And on the right side are conservatives, reactionaries, and fascists. But in the middle, in between that, in the United States, we have Democrats and Republicans. The Democratic Party is center left, so they're the liberal party. But to the left of them is the Social Democrats, or the Democratic Socialists. And they believe in socialism, which is socialism is basically a softer version of communism. It believes in collective ownership of the means of production, basically favoring cooperative ownership over private enterprise. So socialists believe in more government programs like nationalized health care, government child care, like Mandami's talking about, rent freezes, things of that nature. Whereas liberal Democrats, don't believe in that. Liberal Democrats like Andrew Cuomo, they believe in in basically free enterprise. Less free enterprise than conservatives, but more free enterprise than social democrats, and way more free enterprise than communist. Basically, a social democrat is like a communist, but like a softer version of a communist, basically. More uh, more government ownership than the average Democrat, which is a liberal. So I hope that answers your question, Lisa. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically you have a political spectrum from the far left to the far right, and liberals or Democrats, liberal and Democrat are synonymous with each other. They they're the same thing in the United States. You know, and you have two sides. You have the right side, like I said. So somebody like Trump, for example, right, is Trump is a conservative, okay? But to the right of somebody like Trump is somebody like Nick Fuentes. He's a reactionary. And to the right of somebody like Nick Fuentes is somebody like a Nazi, like Adolf Hitler. So on the left side, you have Andrew Cuomo, which is a mainstream liberal. But to the left of him is Zoran Mamdani, a socialist. But to the left of somebody like and Bernie Sanders, to the left of somebody like Zoran Mamdani or Bernie Sanders is somebody like Fidel Castro, right? And even to the left of somebody like Fidel Castro is an anarchist, somebody who doesn't believe in any government at all. you, you, you know, and somebody like that would be, there's nobody like that in modern day politics that I could point to uh, as an example. But the furthest left in this country is social democrats. Zoran Mamdani, AOC, Bernie Sanders. And the furthest right in somebody in this country would be like a Charlie Kirk or a Nick Fuentes, somebody who's even to the right of Donald Trump. It's kind of, remember we talked about, Lisa, the kind of difference between MAGA Republicans and the Republican Party of George W. Bush? Well, this is kind of the Democratic version of that. The social democrats would be like uh, the Democratic equivalent of MAGA Republicans, a more extreme version of the conventional Democrats that already exist. You know what I mean? But a less extreme version than Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Like nobody in America, right wing or left wing, no right winger. Well, some right wingers are, as we saw with the Young Republican group chat. Some right wingers are pointing to the far right, to Adolf Hitler, and some on the left are pointing to Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union. And like Fidel Castro and like Cuba and like Venezuela, they like that kind of stuff. Some on the left do. But most people, most normal people, both politicians and regular people would not favor figures like Adolf Hitler, Mao Zedong, Joseph Stalin, or Fidel Castro. Most people would disavow these these individuals. I would hope, and no politician is going to come out and say that they support any of these either far left or far right individuals, because there's something in politics called the horseshoe theory. What that basically means is the furthest right you go, you get the same result with the furthest left you go, and vice versa. They both, communism and fascism, both end in dictatorships. They both end in authoritarian regimes. They both end in mass murder, and they both end in oppression. So no matter where you go, whether you're far to the right like Adolf Hitler or far to the left like Joseph Stalin and Fidel Castro, it's all bad. It's all oppression, right? And that we don't want. But somewhere in the middle, depending on your values, somewhere in the middle lies, your area. So if you're a mainstream Republican that's not MAGA, you probably favor George W. Bush or favor George W. Bush's father, right? But if you're a little bit further right to that, you probably favor Donald Trump. If you're a little further right than that, you probably favor Charlie Kirk or J.D. Vance. Right? And if you're further right than that, I don't know what to tell you because you're a fascist, you're a Nazi, right? And the same thing on the left. If you favor mainstream Democrats like Bill Clinton or Andrew Cuomo, you're probably a normal, sane person. You have a little bit crazy views, whatever, right? I mean, a little bit outdated views that are no longer applicable in the 21st century. But you're still pretty cool, in my opinion. But if you favor Zohar Mandami or Bernie Sanders, you're better than the mainstream, and I'll probably vote for you. But if you further than that and you favor Joseph Stalin or Fidel, I don't know what to tell you because again, you're a crazy person. And like you are insane. I'm writing you off. And like, because again, a horseshoe theory, the furthest right you go, you end up in the same place. The furthest left you go, you end up in the same place. Although Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin were enemies, they kind of were the same thing. David talks about Nicolae Ceausescu, also a communist. He was another dictator, evil bastard. But conservatives will say that all Democrats are communist and Marxist. They said it about Obama. They say it about Mandami. They say it about AOC. And some Democrats will say that all Republicans, no matter who, is not as a Nazi and is a fascist. And that's not necessarily true. That's just smear. you know what I mean? But it's smear on both ends because Andrew Cuomo is the furthest thing from Joseph Stalin or Fidel Castro that you can get. And George W. Bush, as much as he was hated, is one of the furthest things from Mussolini or Adolf Hitler or Augusto Pinochet that you can get to. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have, thank God, our politics is a politics of moderation in the United States. We don't have in our history examples of far right politicians ever, or far right or far left politicians ever making it very far. We have examples of them running. We have examples of them participating and losing. You know what I mean? Like, I would say that Donald Trump is probably the furthest right that we've ever gotten as far as elected. You know what I mean? And the furthest left we've ever gotten is probably FDR. You know what I mean? Like, we've had Huey Long. On the left side, we've had Huey Long run. He was assassinated. He ran in the 30s. He was a politician from Louisiana. He was basically like a semi-communist. Right? We had George McGovern, who ran against Richard Nixon in 1972 presidential election. He was defeated in one of the largest elections. He was considered a crazy person, far left. He was defeated roundly. We've had far right politicians like George Wallace, who ran in 64, 68, and 72, also lost, kind of ran on a segregationist ticket. Strom Thurmond, another guy, far right. These individuals have lost all elections because the American people are people of moderation. We don't favor either communism or socialism. We're not given to those kind of impulses, at least in our history. Now, whether or not, young people seem to be attracted to these types of fringe political ideologies for some reason. And maybe because they never studied history and then they don't have experience. You know, Not like the boomers. We make fun of the boomers and stuff, but the boomers had experience with both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And they feared both the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. And they didn't want our country to end up like the Soviet Union or Nazi Germany. So, but see, social democrats like Mondami and like AOC, they kind of base their economic philosophy, Lisa, not on communism or or hardcore socialism like Venezuela or communism like China or Cuba. They base their economic philosophy on Scandinavia, the Scandinavian countries like Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Denmark, where these countries do have, things like paid child care, a national health care system, and a robust federal government. But and it works out for them because their happiness index is higher than it is in the United States or even Canada, right? But here's the thing that I disagree with, me personally, with this comparison. I understand it works out on paper. When guys like Bernie Sanders or guys like Mondami or people like AOC say this, it works out in paper. But the difference is these countries are smaller. These countries are a lot smaller than the United States. And these countries don't have the military expenditures that the United States has. So while I agree with it in principle, I don't think it's practical in real life, even for on a small scale, like just New York City, because New York City is the largest city in the United States and the third largest city in the world, population-wise. What happens with central planning, like democratic socialism or all forms of socialism, really, is that the government tries to manage everyone's life or whatever, and they end up rationing off resources because they can't meet the needs of all people. So resources become scarce. It's like, for example, right? A teacher brings a pizza pie into the class, right, Lisa? And that teacher has to divide the pie up into 74 pieces. How much of a little piece is every kid going to get? They're going to get a small, tiny piece of pizza, a small, little, tiny piece of pizza. So the examples that Mondami gives, like Oregon or smaller states, or the examples on a country basis that AOC gives or Bernie, they work because those populations are small, right? Our population is huge in both New York City and the United States as a whole. It won't work here. So while it sounds good on paper, I don't think it works out in reality. And that in general is the problem with ideologues. That's both on the right and the left. Things sound great on paper, but can they be done feasibly? Can it be done? I said this about Andrew Yang when he ran for president, as well as when he ran for mayor president in 2020 and mayor in 2021, is that the idea of a universal. Yeah, that's true. I just think it won't. I mean, you're right, Lisa. Lisa says NYC should just give it a try, see if it works. Saying it won't is just dumb. We've tried our way for the longest, capitalist way and right-wing way and mainstream Democrat way, and maybe, it's time for something different. But I feel like, give it a chance. But I feel like one of the things I don't like about Mondami, and I don't know if Lisa and I agree on this, but I'll just throw it out there and see, is that he's really soft on crime. And that's a huge issue in New York City. Crime is a huge issue in New York City, and he's soft on crime. He's very soft on crime. And I understand why. You know what I mean? He doesn't want to appear oppressive to minorities. You know what I mean? Because minorities are a huge constituency in the Democratic Party. And if he says he's tough on crime to many people, and of course, understandably so, because of the way the police have been weaponized against black and brown people, that raises an eyebrow. Whether it's a national debate or it's a local debate, whenever you start talking about crime statistics, people start calling you racist because of the way the police have been used to weaponize against black and brown individuals. You know what I mean? So they did it to Giuliani. They said that Giuliani was racist. You know what I mean? And a lot of policies about Giuliani were racist, but listen, if one demographic is committing the crime and they target that demographic disproportionately, that doesn't make them racist. You know, and that just means that demographic is committing that crime. You know what I'm saying? They can't say that. No politician can say that, but that's the unspoken truth. You know what I'm saying? Nobody is sitting here saying, I'm not anyway, sitting here saying that it's a genetic reason. You know what I mean? Like, oh, well, they're like that because they're Mexican, or they're like that because they're African American or Puerto Rican. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying that if this group is committing the disproportionate number of crimes for whatever reason, whether the reason be economics or systematic racism, whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. You have to tackle the issue. When you go to the doctor and you have a sickness, right? Does the doctor sit around and say, what's the cause of this sickness? He may say that after he gives you medicine, but he will not give you medicine to treat the infection first and wonder and speculate and theorize about why you have it. Why I have it is not important. The important part is that I have it, and you have to tackle the issue. You can tackle the root of the issue later, but you have to tackle the initial issue. If I have cancer, why I got the cancer is not necessarily as important as getting the freaking cancer out of me, right? You know what I mean? So sitting here analyzing and theorizing about, oh, why is it like this? Is it systemic racism? That's not helpful. You know what I mean? That's academics. That's being with your head too far in the books and too far up your own ass to realize what the people need. And let's just be honest, crime affects everybody, no matter what the race, but it affects disproportionately groups of color because the groups of color have to live in these communities. You know what I'm saying? They have to live in these communities. So Hispanics have to live with Hispanic crime. Black people have to live with black crime. White people have to live with white crime. Let's just face it. This is one of the reasons, the things I had against Charlie Kirk was that he was always talking about black and brown issues, but he was never addressing the issues within his own community, which is school shootings, which is inceldom, which is social isolation. These are problems in the white community, and he wasn't addressing these issues. You know what I mean? He was always deflecting and talking about, illegal immigration or whatever. He was another guy, an ideologue avoiding the issues. Mondani is like that for the Democratic side. You're talking about a larger systemic issue, but we want to talk about getting rid of the thing. We want to talk about what can we do to get rid of the issue? What can we do to minimize the issue? We don't care how you do it. We just want you to do it. You know what I mean? And stop and frisk was fucked up, but it was effective. And when the Bill de Blasio stopped it, it increased the crime in New York City. So listen, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. You have to hurt feelings. You have to hurt feelings. You have to make some enemies. This is life. You know what I'm saying? On a national scale, would Barack Obama have been a good president if he didn't attack terrorism, if he went around terrorism and he pussyfooted around terrorism and he made apologies for the jihadists just because they were Muslim and he didn't want to appear Islamophobic? No, he'd be a horrible president if he did that. You know what I'm saying? You can't please everybody. You have to upset some people and you have to upset some demographics if you're going to address real issues. This is the harsh part of politics. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, again, a doctor. A doctor may tell you, listen, a woman that has breast cancer, listen, in order to get rid of the cancer, miss, I have to cut off your breast. I have to do this operation. It sucks that she has to live without a breast, and it's horrible and it's terrible to do. But what would you rather have? Appease her and, appease her feelings and have her keep her cancerous breast and have her die? You know what I'm saying? Like, so I get it. I understand the history. I understand how the police have been weaponized against the black and brown community. How and how the police have been used to brutalize black people, specifically black men. I understand that. But that does nothing for the on-the-ground situation of an older, elderly black woman being robbed in her elevator in the projects because some gangster, decides to stick her up. This is a black person being harmed by another black person, or a Hispanic being harmed by another Hispanic. And even in the white community, the school shootings. Tyler Robinson was not caused by black people or illegal immigrants. He was caused by white people because MAGA refuses to address the issue because they don't want to appear anti-white because of identity politics. They didn't talk about it. So the Democrats are just as guilty of that when it comes to us as the Republicans are with their white criminal elements. You have to address the issue because truth is no respecter of persons. If it's true, it's true no matter who it is. Right, exactly, Lisa. Lisa's saying if it's a lack of jobs, then make more jobs for them. Yeah, for some people it is. Some people it's an economic issue. For other people, they're just bad people, Lisa. I mean, there is bad people in the world. There are bad white people. There are bad black people. There are bad Hispanics. There are bad Asians. There's bad people. And for those bad people, sometimes punitive damages is the only way to go. Fuck how you look. Shoot first, ask questions later. In some cases, not in all cases. They should be evaluated. Police should not be militarized in the way like they are. They're not an army. I'm not saying that, but this idea that exists among some in the left of defunding the police was bullshit. And it only put black and brown communities more at risk. I'm from the hood. I know about these people, but I also know about how police can be weaponized. So I see both sides of it. You know what I mean? I see both sides of it. They're both fucked up. Cops are, I said this to Lisa yesterday, and I stand by this wholeheartedly. Cops are assholes, guys, but they're necessary evil. Until we change human nature, cops and military and stuff like that will always be a necessary evil. It sucks. It really does suck. But unfortunately, this is how it has to be. You know what I mean? And Mandami trying to be a friend to everybody, if he becomes mayor, is going to find out on a city level the same thing that Barack Obama found out on a national level. Talk is one thing, but anybody can say anything on a political campaign. Just like Trump, he was another one. You say things on a political campaign that you can't deliver because they're not practical. talk is one thing, but when you get in office and you realize what it takes to actually make this happen, half of it might not happen. Because that's why it's politics. That's why you're working with other people, unless you want to be a complete dictator, which is not allowed in the United States. you, you know, you can talk, like people say politicians are liars, and some are. They say the right things to get into office, but I think oftentimes what happens, and what really happens in real life, is that they don't actually know what it takes to be in office. Some of these newer ones, like Trump or Mondami or even Obama, they don't actually know what it takes. And when they get into office, they found out that it's harder than what they imagined. And they right. Lisa's saying, it would be funny if Mondami gets in and ends up being mayor and does a 360 on everything he says, especially on crime. That will happen. That will have to happen because New York is in. If he doesn't, then he'll be a terrible mayor. When this is why people trust experienced politicians like like Cuomo or Bill Clinton or Joe Biden, because they know what it takes to be in office. Some of these inexperienced ones don't. You know what I'm saying? So they're just normal people with opinions like us. They don't know the real secrets. They don't know what it takes. You know what I mean? So people see like Trump or Obama or Mondami, doing 360s or whatever, like Lisa's saying. And they're like, well, he didn't say he was going to do that, right? Never a she, even though I think Hochul was kind of like that. But we don't know what Hochul actually believes because she never ran for office. She was put in power. And like, we never saw her in a debate or anything, like, um, we have no idea what this woman believes. This is why it's crazy that she's governor. And like, she rarely makes speeches. She rarely does press events. She almost doesn't exist as governor. It's like the governor's office in Albany is empty. Like half the people in New York might not even know what the hell she looks like. And when she did open her mouth, the one time she did, she said something that was so stupid and so incredibly racist that my mouth was on the floor. That this woman would even think of saying this when she said that there are black kids in New York that don't know what the internet is. Like, are you serious, lady? Like you never talk since your whole tenure as governor, and you finally open up your daggone mouth and you say the stupidest moronic thing that I've ever heard. Every kid in 2025, irrespective of race, knows what the internet is. You know what I'm saying? There are kids in third world countries, in Sudan, in Kenya, in Chechnya, that know what the internet is. You know what I mean? Like, are you serious? But we don't actually know what she believes. But the point is, like Lisa's saying, like Trump, he came in here and he made all these promises, and in a way, Mondami is sort of like a Democratic Trump. He's making a lot of promises, but I don't think he can deliver on a lot of the promises. The man. Right, the congestion prices, exactly, Lisa. That is very unpopular. with a lot of commuters, including my mom. Like my mom is apolitical. My mom doesn't care really about politics, but the congestion prices thing, you know, was something that she despised. And I told her it was Hochul, that did that. And another thing too, the whole PPL switch, like it used to be like in New York they have this thing called City Pack, where a New Yorkers can take care of their loved one that is disabled as opposed to a home attendant. And it used to be outsourced to private companies, and now it's this public partnership bullshit. And there was a lot of red tape for a lot of the consumers, especially at first. And that was one of the things that Hochul signed off on as well. Right. So Lisa's absolutely right. Congestion pricing. And I think when it comes her time to run for governor, when the gubernatorial race comes up, she's going to lose. She's going to lose because, again, somebody who doesn't know anything, and was thrusted into the position. So a lot of these people that they think they're fit to run because they have great ideas or they're great talkers or whatever, right? In her case, I don't know what she was doing or whatever, like who picked her or whatever, but like, this is why it's never good to vote on personality. It's never good to vote because the guy's a Muslim or because the guy's black or because the guy was a television star like Trump or she's a woman. You have to understand these issues and you have to investigate these issues, especially the issues that are dear to you, because if you vote on personality, like it's a popularity contest, like it's freaking the high school election. I was 2 terms as my high school president. And one thing I told people is just because you like me, don't vote for me just for that. Vote for me because you like what I represent. Vote for me because I'm going to be your representative or your advocate to the school administration. I'm going to be your voice. I'm going to speak for you. You're going to come to me, and on your behalf, I'm going to represent you. I'm going to do my best to represent you. I was humble about it. I said I'm going to do my best. I didn't say I was going to do it because that's where politicians on every level end up wrong. If you say you're going to do it, you might not be able to do it because we don't live in a dictatorship. We live in an electoral system where we have to make compromises. That's part of politics, a give and take. So I'm going to try my best to speak to your behalf, but I'm not going to make crazy promises. I'm not going to make pizza parties every week. I'm not going to abolish homework, because I can't do that. It sounds nice, but it's not practical. And in the end, it's not productive. And people that were running against me were making these stupid promises, talking about they were going to, this is the high school equivalent of some of the things that Mondami's talking about. Like they were going to field trips every week. Can I really do that? Is that within my power? Is that within my budget? No. Because money doesn't grow on trees, right? So when you make fantastical promises like that, the voter base should know that can't happen. Because it takes money to do that kind of stuff. What I did do during my administration was I had a bake sale. I had bake sales and candy sales to raise more money for things that they wanted, like pizza parties and trips. And that kind of stuff can be done on a local level, on the state level, on the federal level as well, with fundraising activities, that can help people pay for that without excessive taxation that will strangle the electoral base. But you have to be practical with voters. You can't just promise them things, because promising things will get you elected, but it won't get you results once you get in. You'll be stuck, not knowing whether they're coming or going because you promise things that you cannot deliver on, like Trump with the wall or Mandami with some of the promises he's making. I think like the rent freeze. What the rent freeze will do is it will alienate a lot of the building owners. Um, Government grocery stores, that's no good. You know what I mean? Because government owned things don't generate income. Government only extracts income. They get their funds from people, not from profit. So that's no good. But again, I think that a lot of people that don't know how politics works, politics is basically communicating, compromise. The best politicians in history compromised. You know, there has to be compromise in the end somehow. Lisa says, I think with Mandami, what he said, he would do a lot of people also like him because he's a young person. Yeah, he's a young person having two presidents, older people. Yeah, because there is this whole thing. This goes across the political spectrum that we talked about earlier. This whole thing is whether it's the right wing or the left wing is a whole we're dealing with a generational battle. The boomers are getting older. Boomers are people born to parents that were in World War II, born in the 40s and 50s. And this is like Trump. This is like Joe Biden. This is like a lot of the politicians, right? And the generation coming up now, millennials and Gen Z, they're like, we're not. Socialism doesn't scare us. Socialism isn't the boogeyman that it was to people during the Cold War generation because the Cold War ended in 1991. It's basically a part of history now. You know what I mean? They're not scared of things like communism or socialism. They see it pretty much a compromise between communism and capitalism working out for China, China being an economic giant. They see it working out for cities on a city level or a state level like Oregon, right? And they're like, oh, well, if that could work there, then that could work here, right? Let's give it a try. Like Lisa's saying, they're being more open-minded. But boomers are not being open-minded about it. And that's the generational clash. Just like the boomers had their own generational clash, during the counterculture of the 1960s. They rejected their parents' values. Their parents happily went to war during World War II and happily went to war during the Korean War. But they weren't willing to do that. They protested the Vietnam War. They protested U.S. imperialism and U.S. involvement in that. So they've forgotten what it's like to be young. Now, our generation is protesting against them. So that's why. So whether you're a conservative, right? Lisa's right. Like Obama started wanting younger politicians to be elected when he won. People were like, "Oh, well, he's a good president and he's young. Let's try it." Right. That's why guys on the left were like that were popular. And it's happening on the right too. It's happening on both sides. That's why Charlie Kirk was so popular with younger conservatives. And they were priming him to be on their side. You know what I mean? So it's happening on both sides. But I agree, Barack Obama really did start. Buttigieg was really popular with young liberals, young Democrats, because of that reason, at least. AOC, you know, People want change. People want something different. And like Lisa's saying, Obama, this is why Mandami should have picked Obama as his politician. He has nothing in common with FDR. Nothing at all. He has more in common with FDR was the cousin of another president. He was from a political family. He was from one of the oldest families of Dutch descent in New York. That has nothing to do with like Mandami. He just was, that pissed me off when he did that. And trying to sound smart, trying to sound educated, trying to sound above it all. It kind of reminded me in the 2000 presidential debate when George W. Bush said, they asked him who was his favorite philosopher, and he said Jesus. Like, come on, really? That's your answer? And like, Jesus wasn't a philosopher. Christianity is a philosophy, but Jesus wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't Socrates or Plato or Aristotle. It'd be like, and Lisa and I have had this discussion and even this debate under the video of this person. It'd be like if somebody asked me, well, who's the political figure that most, who's the political figure that most affects your life on a day-to-day basis? And if I said, well, my political figure that most affects my life on a day-to-day basis is Julius Caesar. If I said that, I would sound like a complete asshole because other than what I've read in history books, I don't know anything about Julius Caesar other than what I've read, which could all be lies. Because what did Napoleon say? Napoleon said, the history is lies agreed upon, right? So everything we read in history, if we'd ever lived through it, it'll all be bullshit, right? How do we know? So me saying, oh, my favorite politician is Julius Caesar, is me trying to sound like I'm more educated than the guy who probably gave an answer like John Kennedy or like Reagan or a normal answer. You're trying to sound overly sophisticated. It's the same thing like, and Tyler the Creator brought this up. This happens a lot in rap. And Sean and I have talked about this in regards to rap too. Somebody will ask somebody in their teens or 20s, who's their top 5 rapper or top 5 album? And they'll start naming Jay-Z's first album. They'll name Biggie's first album. They'll name Nas. And come on, like Wu-Tang, like, that's not your favorite rappers. Those aren't your favorite rappers. Like, some of them probably are, but you weren't there for that. You think that those are the answers you're supposed to give because those are the conventional answers. Saying that makes it seem like better than the other person that will name like Nicki Minaj or Drake. And you're trying to appear smart. Same thing like when somebody uses big words that they can't even spell because they're trying to be smarter than the average person. Like, you could say the same shit you just said with normal freaking words that everyday average people use. Like, so his answer of LaGuardia and FDR was bullshit. He has more, if he really studied history, he has less in common with FDR and more in common with Barack Obama. But I feel like some of the people that are further to the left of Barack Obama, like we talked about, might not like Obama, even though he started this trend basically of the movement of the Democratic Party. So he felt like, oh, I can't say Obama, so I'll just say FDR. Even though probably all what he knows about FDR is something written in a history book. That might not, in a history book written by somebody who wasn't even probably born when FDR was president, right? Or LaGuardia was mayor. Like, it's a bullshit answer. And going back to that, the last point, I'll end on this. I'll close out on this. Curtis Wheeler's answer angered somebody. It angered Donald Trump. because Donald Trump wanted Curtis Sweela to say that his favorite politician was Donald Trump, but Sweela didn't say that. So Donald Trump tweeted out on both X and the Truth Social that Sweela clearly lost. That Sweela handed the mayoral position to Mandami because he didn't name me. Once again, Donald Trump centering himself as the center of the universe. Like, no, Donald Trump, the world doesn't begin and end with you. The conservative movement doesn't begin and end with you. You're a newcomer. You're a Johnny come lately. And Sweela's not MAGA. He's conservative. Again, we're going back to this political spectrum allegiance thing. He's a conservative, but he's not a MAGA conservative. He's not. He's to the left of Donald Trump. He's apart from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is further to the right of him. He's not that. There's nobody like that. There's never going to be a type of MAGA, because even when Giuliani was mayor of New York, he was a moderate Democrat. He became more conservative and MAGA later on, but he was a moderate Democrat. There's never going to be. There used to be a term for it. Our governor, Nelson Rockefeller, one of our famous governors, it used to be a term, a person that was a Republican, but a liberal Republican, a moderate Republican, there used to be Rockefeller Republicans, right? Because during the 1964 presidential RNC, he spoke out against the extremist, of the John Birch Society, which was an extremist anti-communist group started by the Welsh candy maker. And he spoke out against the KKK, two far-right organizations, and they labeled him as a liberal Republican, which he was liberal. But Republicans in New York are different than Republicans nationally, because New York politics, a MAGA-type Republican is never going to be elected anything in New York, because New York is too blue for that. You know what I mean? So if you're a Republican in New York, the best you'll get is a Curtis Sweela. So of course he wasn't going to say Trump. You know what I mean? And people probably didn't even like Trump like that. You know what I mean? So he didn't name Trump, and Trump got upset, and he basically went on his tirade against Sweela. You know what I mean? And so, and he has nothing in common with Trump. So it's not like Mandami. Mandami should have named Obama, and he didn't. He has nothing. He named Reagan, and Reagan is the equivalent to a mainstream conservative of FDR to a mainstream Democrat. You know what I mean? Like, they are kind of parallels. FDR took the country in one direction trajectory with his election in 1933. He had huge victories where he even won over Republican states. He was beloved by the people, and he was a 3-term president. The only in history. Reagan wasn't, because by then the 22nd Amendment had been passed, and that was illegal. But if the 22nd Amendment wasn't passed, Reagan would have won. If he was allowed to run in 1988, he would have won in 1988. He was that popular, and he got New York on the electoral map. So they were both transformational presidents for each of their respective sides. So, but Sweela has a lot more in common with Reagan than Mandami does with FDR. He just felt like that's the answer he had to give. I'm glad that Sweela didn't bend the knee to Trump and give Trump as the answer, because Trump is having a huge effect on the Republican Party right now, kind of switching from the Reaganite Republicans to the old school Republicans to his base. But we don't know if that's going to last. If in 2028 J.D. Vance wins, then Trump really had an effect on the party. If he doesn't, and it goes back to the old school Republicans like Lisa talked about and George W. Bush talked about, then he'd had no effect. He didn't have a Reagan effect or an FDR effect, because he didn't change the complexion of his party. And I don't mean the literal complexion, even though FDR did change the literal complexion of the Democratic Party, because it was FDR who got black people in the North, black people that could vote that were in the North, to switch to the Democratic Party, where previously they'd been Republicans, of course, because the Republican Party, freed the slaves. But FDR launched a campaign during the campaign when he was running against Herbert Hoover. He said to turn aside your pictures of Lincoln. In other words, turn them over and vote Democrat, which was a crazy thing at the time to think about, because the Democrats were the party of segregation. So the fact that black people in the North were voting with the same party that white Southerners were voting for was amazing. You know what I mean? And Reagan kind of forced a lot of black people out of the Republican Party. Like, Reagan was the last gasp of black people actually being Republican. Like, a lot of people will say, well, Martin Luther King's father was a Republican. Yeah, he was. Jackie Robinson was too. But at that time, it was kind of an even 50-50. Like, black people could go either way, right? But by the end of Reagan, that was not the case. Black people were pretty much solidly Democrats. That's kind of changing now. There is Black MAGA, but nobody really respects them. And Trump has tried to reach out to black people in certain ways, but it hasn't worked, because you can't, as the Democrats found out, because the Democrats, from the time of FDR to the time of Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, the Democrats tried to juggle the racist and the black people in the same party, but you can't have that. You either got to force one out or force the other out. Republicans ended up siding with the racist and forcing black people out, and Democrats ended up forcing the racist out and putting black people in. And so if Trump wants to reach out to more black people, and the other MAGA Republicans want to reach out to more black people, they have to force those racists out of the party. If they don't do that, then that's never going to happen. Those two things can't coexist. Those white racists that defend slavery and defend segregation cannot coexist in the same political party as black people. They just can't. That can't be done. The Democrats are kind of going through something similar right now. The Democrats have a lot of Jewish people. The Jewish coalition in the Democratic Party was huge because a Democratic president, Harry Truman, was the president who, 11 minutes after its founding, supported the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. But now, a lot of Muslims are becoming Democrats. A lot before George W. Bush and before 9/11, a lot of the Muslim community, the immigrant Muslim community, not the black Muslim community, the immigrant Muslim community from the Arab countries or South Asia, they were mostly Republicans because they were business owners. A lot of them are business owners. A lot of them are religious. So they like the pro-business and religious aspect of the Republican Party. But then the Republican Party started to become Islamophobic, so many of them switched to the Democrats. But the problem then becomes the Democrats have always been very pro-Jewish and pro-Israel. So it's like, how do you serve two masters? How do you serve the Israel lobby and the Muslims? When they're ideological opposites. And what's eventually happening, judging by Trump's ovation that he got in the Israeli Congress, the Knesset, is the Jewish people are going to switch sides. I think in the future, and with Mandami's election as mayor, if the Mandami's election as mayor happens, I think a lot of Jewish people are going to switch sides and start voting more Republican, much like a lot of white Southerners switch sides and they started voting Republican, because of segregation, or a lot of black people started voting Democrat because of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. This has happened in history. Sides have switched. So I think this is happening now with Muslims and Jews because I'm seeing this personally with Vicky's mom, her being her Jewish and her used to be a Democrat, you know what I mean? Like, but she's starting to see from her perspective that uh, with the embrace of Mondami, uh, that from her perspective, the Democratic Party is becoming more anti-Jewish and more anti-Israel. So she's switching over slowly to the Republican side. Uh, you know, but that was all, guys. Thank you, David and Lisa, for contributing. Love you guys. Peace. It was an interesting debate. Overall, I think Mandami has this in the bag. Even though Swila, if it was just Swila and Mandami, I think Swila made the most sense. You know what I mean? He came with a common sense approach and he didn't bend the knee to Trump. But I think if he becomes mayor, uh, he may bend the knee to Trump, and may move to the MAGA side more because he feels his overall feeling is like we don't want to be antagonistic towards Washington because we're a part of the United States and we depend on Washington. So if it becomes a thing where the mayor of New York is combative with the president of the United States, that's not good for New York. And I think if Mandami becomes mayor, he'll have to capitulate to Trump at least a little bit. Because if he doesn't, Trump overpowers New York. You know what I mean? Like the federal government overpowers the city government. So I'm not saying you have to be a slave to Trump and you have to capitulate to everything he does, but you have to work with him somewhat. You know what I mean? And if Mandami becomes mayor and Trump is still the president, this will be a hard couple of years while this is happening because if both sides, if Trump or Mandami remain as adamantly against each other as they both are right now, this will be a hard couple of years to be a New Yorker, man. You know what I mean? And when we say things like that there is a civil war brewing, this is what we're talking about. You know what I mean? When the branches of government are not working together. This happened in the 1850s. We've been here before. You shouldn't try to always, say that history, things like Mandami said, like he's like an next FDR, because it's not the case. Everything is different. But you should always use history as a rubric, as a study, because it helps you learn about today. That's why we study history. Otherwise, if it's not going to be applicable to what's going on today, and you can't use it and learn the lessons of it from history, then history is a worthless subject, because who really gives a fuck about things that happened 50 years ago, hundreds of years ago? If you can't apply it, then who gives a fuck about it, right? And then it's a worthless subject. you know what I mean? But if you take the lessons of it and you learn from it, and you apply it somehow, you know what I mean, then you'll end up better. If you don't, you won't. And what happened in the 1850s was a breakdown of civility in the United States. The sides stopped talking to each other, the South and the North. It got to a point in Congress where Charles Sumner was beaten up, with a cane by another congressman, literally beaten up. Now, it hasn't gotten to that point yet here in modern times, but it could. State governments stopped working with the federal government. That was the cause of the Civil War. South Carolina seceded from the Union. They said, we're not going to follow the dictations of Abraham Lincoln. And that's how the Civil War started. You know what I mean? So if a state government or a city government is rebelling against the federal government and being so antagonistic, and they're being antagonistic back, then we have another civil war in our hands. And we don't need that because we barely survived the first one. The first one is the deadliest war in American history. The Battle of Shiloh is the deadliest battle in history. The Battle of Gettysburg, those battles, the Battle of Bull Run. I know they're boring. I tutored in social studies. I tutored in history. I know when you talk about those battles in the Civil War, they're boring. Shane Gillis, the comedian, he made that joke. He said, if you're on a date and you put on Ken Burns' documentary in the Civil War, it'll make a woman run away, because those are boring things unless you really love history. But it shows what happens when politics stop working, when that urge to compromise, like we talked about earlier, the give and take, when that stops working, then what's next? War. When we stop talking, we start fighting, and then war happens, and we don't need that. You know what I'm saying? We experienced that, and we barely survived it. Were it not for the strong personality of Abraham Lincoln and his leadership skills, we wouldn't have a country today. Country wouldn't exist. And the great generals like General Grant, But and speaking of FDR, another thing, if Mandami is a real student of FDR, he would know that even though FDR was kind of, more to the left of the average Democrats at the time, he pulled back, because if FDR hadn't pulled back, and he could have went full on authoritarian, he could have been the next Mussolini, he could have been the next Hitler, but he didn't. He wasn't. You know what I mean? So Mandami should learn from that. And sometimes government is not always the answer. Anyway, peace, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button. Like I said, Lisa and David, thank you for contributing. Love you guys. Peace.